help them understand what we are going to. Okay, so now we are live with Professor Krashen, Stephen Krashen, and Dr. Nushan Ashtari. So this is actually a special surprise. Maybe we wait just 1 minute before we begin to check whether the audience is joining us. Okay, now they are joining us.
Let me teach you some Hebrew. L'chaim, to life.
L'chaim.
That's the toast.
L'chaim. So you drink coffee?
I'm very good at it.
Yeah, very interesting.
Coffee changed my life, let me tell you.
How?
Yes. I was in Ethiopia. I was 25 years old. I had been teaching in public school, and I came to school one morning with 3 hours sleep, and I felt terrible. Until that time, I had never had any coffee in my life. My mother drank coffee, and in those days, we thought coffee was bad for you. But I had no choice. I had 3 hours sleep and a day ahead of me with, children. And there was an Egyptian teacher on the compound. She had her house on the compound. My wife and I have talked about her. We want to find her and thank her for doing this for me. She invited us to espresso during coffee break. Espresso, oh my gosh. So I had a double espresso, my first cup of coffee, and I woke up. For the first time, I woke up. I thought, is this how everybody feels? What have I been missing? I didn't get nervous. It just made me feel normal. Since that time, since that day, my life has been a success. Before then, I was not a good student. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I dropped out of school. I failed my courses. I had to leave the university and come back. Since that time, everything has been very good. I went back to the university. I got good grades. I got a PhD. People started telling me how smart I was. They never did that before. Okay. So that's what coffee has done for me. It makes me normal. Now it's different for everybody. I know that.
It changed your life.
Absolutely, for the better. And my mother felt bad that she drank so much coffee. So I told her, I will make up for all the coffee that you didn't drink, all the coffee that you denied yourself. Because I'm your son and I honor you, I will drink that coffee. So that was wonderful. We had a coffee party when I got back. My mom and I, she and I, and we just told stories about the family and talked. And I used that as my speech on the day of her funeral, what we talked about, to honor her. So I am my mother's son, and I'm a coffee drinker, thanks to my mom.
Thank you very much. Interesting. It's amazing. Okay, maybe, so let's get started. We are about to begin. I just want to check with the audience whether they can hear us and see us well. So do you hear us and see us well? Okay, you need your feedback before we start. Actually, we have this a surprise for you. Maybe we didn't mention that in the announcements. We have new special guest today, Dr. Nushan Ashtari. She's going to participate, yes, in the discussion of this historic webinar. Thank you very much. So you hear me well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So let's get started. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, or good evening, or maybe good night, wherever you might be in this world. Okay, thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. It is my privilege now to extend to you a warm welcome on behalf of Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah University in Fez, Morocco. I am very happy and honored to welcome our special guests, Professor Stephen Krashen and Dr. Nushan Ashtari. Professor Stephen Krashen is going to talk about grammar and language acquisition and so much more, and also Dr. Nushan Ashtari is going to participate in the discussion of this interesting webinar. She's going to intervene maybe when she's asked by Professor Stephen Krashen. Yeah. So we can call it a free debate. So it's a free debate, and we have enough time. So be patient with us, the audience. Please be patient with us for this long journey, and this is the opportunity and get much information from our guest speakers. So before we begin, allow me to introduce our guests. Actually, they don't need any introduction because they're very known internationally, worldwide. But I would give a brief definition, introduction to them, especially for young people and those who do not know them, especially for university students who are going to learn about Krashen's publications and books. So Professor Stephen Krashen was born in 1941. He is a linguist, a professor emeritus at the University of Southern California. He received a PhD in linguistics from the University of California, Los Angeles in 1972. Krashen's numerous papers and books have greatly contributed to the fields of second language acquisition, bilingual education, and reading. He is known for introducing various hypotheses related to second language acquisition, including the acquisition learning hypothesis, the inputs hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the affective filter, and the natural order hypothesis. So most recently, Krashen promotes the use of free voluntary reading during second language acquisition, which he says is the most powerful tool we have in language education. So for Dr. Nushan Ashtari, she is currently now on the faculty of the Rosia School of Education, University of Southern California. She has published research on heritage language development, focusing on the problem of access to books, on teacher training, and on the impact of native speaker reaction to the speech of second language acquirers. So her publications are also available on ResearchGate. For Professor Stephen Krashen, you can, there are many of his publications are freely available on his website, www.sdkrashen.com. As shown here, I'm going to show you. Yes, you can get access to his publications freely. So please give a warm welcome to our guest speakers for today's webinar. And as a reminder for the audience, you can ask also your questions, pose them directly during the presentation, and I'm sure we will have time at the end. Our guests would be pleased to answer some of your questions. Actually, I have taken some of the most cited questions from the audience, and I'm going to pose them right now. So, Professor Stephen Krashen, we would like to thank you very much for accepting the invitation to be here with us to enlighten our thought in the field of language acquisition and language learning. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation, and maybe this is the first time for a Moroccan university to host such a historic, let's say, event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Let me tell you what I'd like to do today. I want to summarize the last 50 years of research. Wow. In the next few minutes, that means about 1 year in every 20 seconds. I'll get that through. And I need to make a private word with Dr. Ashtari, so nobody listen, okay? Nushan, look at my ear. Do you see that? Now look at the picture behind the ear. Do you see that on the wall?
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, my wife, good friend of Nushan's, and
Yes,
I just noticed that. Okay, a little bit of family stuff here. Okay, let me tell you what I'd like to do. My basic goal is I want to make your life easier. I want to make your life more interesting, and I want to save you money all at the same time. All right. Let me first save you some money. We all like to keep up with professional literature and read the journals and look at the new books, and I do too. But I can't do it anymore. Do you know why? It costs too much money. The price of technical books and technical journals have skyrocketed in the last few years. I can no longer afford, I used to subscribe to like 30 journals in different fields. Now I think I'm down to 2, and I'm wondering if I can afford those 2. It's $100 US, $200, $300. Books are the same. Books sometimes cost $200, $300, and you must see what's in them because it's important to keep up. People always get angry at teachers. They don't read the literature. Of course not. It's too expensive, and it's impossible to understand. Even for me, and I've been doing this 50 years, I've read all the papers, I know the work, and I have a hard time understanding them. So, along with a few other noble scholars, we have declared war against the publishers. They have to find an honest way of making a living, not this way. They can get away with this now because a technical book comes out and the university libraries all buy it, and they'll sell maybe 200-300 copies, which you can't read unless you're a university professor. And they don't care because they're making money because they're so expensive. Anyway, here's the new deal. You have my website. On my website, I have listed papers I have published in journals. I have also listed them on, if I'm starting to do this, on ResearchGate. Dr. Ashtari has done the same thing. So have our colleagues, Beniko Mason, Jeff McQuillan, and it's growing. They're all available for free. You may download anything on there. Do not ask my permission. You can use it for any legal purpose. Just don't share it with Donald Trump. That's the only. Okay. He doesn't read anyway, so it's no problem. So the articles are all short. I've been trying to make them as short as possible. I was inspired by the world's most famous academic paper, which was published 4 years ago, on the double helix, the genetic code, DNA, RNA, how it works, the diagram. The paper came out 2.5 pages, very clear. You can understand it. It's all there. So this has been my inspiration in doing this. And several other scholars from around the world have been doing this. So things are changing. It began in the field of mathematics, and now it's spreading. So we can all save some money. And I invite you, when you write your papers, colleagues, please make them short. Please make them comprehensible. And please consider publishing them in open access journals so I can read them. Otherwise, I can't. If you want to get an article from a journal and you don't subscribe, it costs $40 American. And the author doesn't get the money, the journal does. So there's a new sheriff in town, as we say in the Westerns. We're going to change things. Okay, I want to make your life a little easier in classes too. And to do that, I have to tell you what we've done over the last 50 years. I'm going to tell you about a few of the major hypotheses. One is Nabil's already told you about, the acquisition learning hypothesis. That's at the foundation of everything. When I first announced this, I thought everybody knew it. I thought it was old news. I didn't know I was introducing something new to the profession. And some people had used the terminology, so I adopted it too. We think people have 2 ways of getting better in another language. You can learn language, you can acquire language, and they're very, very different. Acquiring language, which we call language acquisition. It means picking up a language. I was in France for a few weeks and I picked up some French. That really means you absorbed it from the people around you. We talked about this the other day, the way people who sell things on the street pick up the languages of their customers without study, just by listening and communicating with people. While you're acquiring language, you don't know what you're acquiring. It happens subconsciously. You think you're having a conversation, you think you're reading a book, of course you are, but without knowing it, you might be acquiring language. Also, you're not aware of what the rules are. You're not aware how it's stored in your brain. It's simply there. Big idea that Dr. Ashtari and I have been discussing for the last couple of weeks. The language acquisition device never shuts off. Wow. We've been finding examples of this. It's always there. It never goes away. The codes that you picked up when you were a child, how other people speak, etc., are with you forever. We're also beginning to suspect that adults can still acquire language just as well as children can. That also never goes away. We can all acquire, and to use the terminology of Frank Smith, acquisition is something the brain does very, very well. We're very good at it. The other process is learning. Learning is knowing about language, knowing the rules. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. My favorite rule, which I'm very proud of because I'm a snob, is that if you're speaking French and the direct object comes before the past participle in the form of a pronoun, you have to make it agree. So you don't say la chose que j'ai, you make the past participle agree. La chose que j'ai pris, you say la chose que j'ai prise. Isn't that nice? Native speakers, a lot of them haven't acquired that, I've been told. And it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to make that happen. That is conscious learning. That's what we focus on in language classes. Learning dominates our system. The brain is quite bad at language learning. We're poor at language learning. We're good at language acquisition. We're not good at language learning. We have constraints on language learning, which I will talk about in a moment. A second hypothesis, which kept us very busy in the 1970s and 80s, we call the natural order hypothesis. And this one says we acquire, not learn the rules of language, we acquire the rules of language in a predictable order. Some things come early, some things come in the middle, some things come late. For example, in English, the ing marker, John is playing the violin. That one comes early. Children get that one right away. Adults get that one right away. Our biggest problem, the third person singular. I go, you go, he goes. That one is late acquired. For children, there might be 6 months to a year between the two. For adults, the third person singular may never come. We all know people who speak English very well as a second language, and they sometimes miss on the third person singular. I know people at the university who are specialists in English grammar. My former colleague, Matt Shibatani, was an expert in English grammar and Japanese grammar. He had studied with Noam Chomsky. Can you imagine? And when I had grammar problems, I always went to Professor Shibatani. Even though he knew the third person singular since he was 7 years old, he still made mistakes. Okay. In his writing, it was perfect, but he still made mistakes. So if Dr. Shibatani made mistakes, that excuses the rest of us who make these mistakes. Okay, some amazing facts about the order hypothesis. 3 amazing facts. You can't change it. You can drill the third person singular all day long, but just like good wine, it will not be ready until its time has come. This explains so many of our problems in teaching language. We try to teach these things early on, but it won't come until we're ready. It doesn't go from simple to complicated. Some very simple rules are acquired late. Some complicated ones, people get very early. Again, that explains our problem. Our syllabus goes from simple to complicated. The natural order that we have found is not the syllabus. I thought that was an easy thing. Let's find out what the order is and teach along the order. I was wrong. Not for the first time and probably not for the last time. It's not the syllabus. There is no syllabus. If you give people the right input, we'll see that later, the result is we acquire along the natural order. Okay, let's talk about grammar, which is supposed to be our main topic. People have quoted me as being an enemy of grammar. Don't ever teach grammar. It's wrong. Teach grammar, go to jail. No, I'm not opposed to grammar. My position on grammar is this. It's hard. It's very hard to teach grammar. It's very hard to apply the rules. Grammar is limited. It's very tough to do. I'm not opposed to it. It's not evil. It's not wrong. It's simply hard to do. There are easier ways. Here's what we think. Let me say this in another way, why grammar is hard. If you're speaking another language and you want to try to apply grammar rules, think of what you have to do. By the way, it's been very good for me to be intermediate in some languages and be beginner in some others. I'm at the beginner level in Mandarin, and I'm at the intermediate level in Spanish, which has been very interesting because I can put myself in the situation of students, people acquiring the language. If I try to monitor and think about rules in Spanish, things get bad. And my Spanish is not bad. I can have a conversation. I'm okay. I can read books in Spanish, but I'm still an intermediate. Here's what I have to do if I want to apply a rule while I'm speaking Spanish. Number one, I have to know the rule. We don't know all the rules. Noam Chomsky doesn't know all the rules. Even grammar teachers don't know all the rules. So number one, that's a huge constraint. Number two, I have to be thinking about correctness. When I'm thinking about correctness, I'm not listening to the other person. And then what I say is completely off, completely irrelevant. Also, you need time to find the rule, drag it up, put it into your sentence. And when you do that, also, you're not listening to what the other person's saying. I spent 10 days in Mexico last year. And when I go to Mexico, I live in a home of the owners of a language school. They put on a conference. And I see them for lunch and dinner, and we have a good time talking, especially when we gossip and talk about other people, of course. Who was it who said, if you can't say something good about someone, sit next to me? So we always did that. Anyway, one of my problems in Spanish, one of the rules I have not acquired, is a rule that comes up everywhere. The form of the verb to be. In Spanish, there are two forms of to be, ser and estar, and they have different meanings. You can't avoid this. It's like speaking German where you can't avoid the endings. They're always there, okay? So it's very easy to make mistakes. I made a decision. Before I went to Mexico, I decided not to worry about it and just let it come out of my mouth. I took the advice of my language therapist. His name is Steve Kaufman. He's a brilliant polyglot. And he said, when you're having a conversation, don't worry about being correct. The other people don't care. They want to know what you're saying, not how you're saying it. So I listened to Mr. Kaufman, and he was absolutely right. I decided to forget about it. I had lunch and dinner every day with 5 language teachers. They never commented on ser and estar. They accepted whatever form I used, and we had wonderful conversations. So this is why it's good to be an intermediate and go through this process yourself. So I decided that it occurred to me also, the only time when the conditions are met, when you know the rule, when you're thinking about grammar, and when you have time, is when you take a grammar test. And our studies back in the 70s and 80s showed that in general, people don't worry about grammar. And when you give them a grammar test, they use it a little more, but still not that much. So my position on grammar is, don't worry about it. Acquire the language. Maybe when you're writing, you can make a few changes here and there. But in general, it's not the core of language teaching. I'll tell you what the core of language teaching is. We go to the big hypothesis. How do we acquire language? Let me illustrate this by giving you a very quick language lesson. I'm going to give you 2 lessons, and you tell me which one is better. I'll use a language that I'm sure that 90% of you have not acquired. Here's lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen und ich möchte voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. Good lesson, right? Now, what would happen if I repeated it? Would that help? No.
No.
How about if I said it louder? How about if I wrote it out on a chalkboard and drew pictures? None of those things help.
No.
Here's lesson number 2. And you have to watch me for this. Das ist meine Hand. Verstehen Sie das? Hand? Ja? Gut. Ich habe 2 Hände. 1, 2. Hier sind meine Ohren. Meine Ohren. Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. Okay? Und das ist mein Mund. Verstehen Sie Mund? Ja, hier ist mein Mund. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Ja, meine Zigaretten. Wo sind meine Zigaretten? Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut, nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, I did everything necessary to teach you German. Let me now share with you the most important concept I have learned about language acquisition, the best kept secret in the profession. We acquire language in one way and only one way, when we understand it. That's it. That's the whole thing. We acquire language when we understand it. I've called this the input hypothesis, the comprehension hypothesis. This was not my idea. I didn't invent it. I wish I had. I took it from other people. In the field of literacy, Frank Smith and Kenneth Goodman knew all about this years before I did. When I discovered their writings, it was so exciting because there was the same idea based on different research, what we call triangulation, coming to the same idea. In the field of second language acquisition, several people knew all about it. Most interesting, a man named Leonard Newmark knew about it, University of California, San Diego, on the linguistics faculty. And I've quoted his work a great deal, say that Leonard was absolutely right. And I ran into him one day. I have to tell you a family story. I went to my uncle and aunt's 50th wedding anniversary celebration. It was only about 2 miles from where I lived at the local synagogue, okay? My Aunt Ann Newmark, my father's sister, and my Uncle Boris's, and Boris Newmark, my Uncle Boris. See, the name is the same. I went to the party, and there was Leonard Newmark. And I said, Leonard Newmark, what are you doing here? He said, Steve Krashen, what are you doing here? And I said, this is my aunt and uncle's 50th anniversary. He said, no, it isn't. It's my aunt and uncle's 50th wedding anniversary. So we share an aunt and an uncle. Is that mystic? Fabulous. Anyway, so it's all in the family. The comprehension hypothesis says we acquire language when we understand it. And 3 things about it are, I think, just phenomenal. Number 1, it's effortless, no work. All you had to do was to watch me make a few silly jokes, point to my head, and you acquired a little German, okay? Second, number 2, you can't help it. Like it or not, you all just acquired some German. There's nothing you can do about it. This language acquisition is not hard work. It's involuntary. I just love that. In our discussions, Dr. Ashtari and I have been discussing this for the last couple of weeks. I keep calling her at midnight. No, I don't. Anyways, I got this idea. It never shuts off, the language acquisition device. And I like Chomsky's idea that the language device is a mental organ, just like the kidneys are an organ. Your visual system is an organ in your body. You can't shut off your kidneys by thinking about it. You can't decide not to use the visual system. The moment you're opening your eyes, These things are there. They're innately programmed. They are part of us, and you can't stop it. And I also think there's no critical period. We'll talk about that later. This was my doctoral dissertation when Lenneberg, whose work I greatly admire, decided there was a neurological basis for the critical period, that when you reach puberty, the left side becomes the left, the right becomes the right, and you can no longer pick up language. Well, our research destroyed that. It's not so. The left is the left, the right is right from the beginning, and it stays that way. And it has nothing to do with language acquisition. So this was quite a breakthrough. I wrote Dr. Lenneberg about it. I strongly agree with what Chomsky says. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. Lenneberg's idea was not correct, and he admitted it right away. He said, I've found evidence true. You're absolutely right. I was wrong. What he did was push us ahead. It was a brilliant hypothesis. It was wrong, but it pushed us and it gave us progress. So I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Lenneberg and his hypothesis. And he was not defensive. He wanted to know what the truth was. Okay, in this case, there's no barrier for adults. And to anticipate what we'll talk about later, adults get very good at language acquisition. There are 3 of us on the screen. 2 of us are living examples of this, and we'll discuss this, okay? Okay, so it's input that counts. That means that speaking is not practicing. Talking is not practicing. Everyone thinks you want to get better at speaking the language. Well, you should talk more. Or the supervisor comes into your English class and says, the teacher's talking all the time. The students have to talk. No, it's the input that counts. The talking is a result. Same thing with writing. Our ability to write well comes from reading. You read a lot, you get the written code. A very interesting and a little complex topic. With time, we'll go into that. Okay. Another interesting fact about language acquisition, I promised you 3. Leonard Newmark, in his writings, said something that seems very obvious, but it's not. It was a brilliant thing to say. If we acquire language by understanding, the input has to be interesting. It can't be boring, all right? If it's not interesting, no one's going to pay attention to this. Well, I pushed this a little bit farther. Well, I got the idea from Professor Newmark. Not only interesting, but very interesting. So interesting that you forget that you're listening to another language, that you're reading another language. A man named Victor Nell wrote a wonderful book called Lost in the Book. That's what you have to be. It has to be a book that's so interesting, you forget who you are, where you are, and if it's in another language, you forget that it's in another language. That's what we need to help our students find. I've been experimenting on myself on this. I'm going to interrupt this by telling you what's happening to me, and I'm going to anticipate pedagogy a little bit. Dr. Beniko Mason, our colleague from Japan, has done some remarkable work in pedagogy. And she has said that kids need lots and lots of easy reading, a lot of it. So I've been doing that myself with Spanish. Again, experimenting on Spanish, so much fun. I live in Southern California, so there's Spanish speakers everywhere. It's great. Anyway, I found graded readers. These are, short books for beginners and made simple, etc. So I've been reading graded readers every day during my time of isolation, playing the piano, reading graded readers, and pumping iron at home. That's what I do. Anyway, I've been reading them a lot. I've been reading, 5, 10, 15 pages a day, sometimes more. And I found easy books that are interesting. That's the breakthrough. We now have graded readers that are absolutely interesting, not just there to help you practice rules, etc. So I've been doing this every day, and every Friday I take a test. I take a test at the grocery store. The first time I went there, the first Friday mornings, they have a special time starting at 6 o'clock in the morning, where old people shop. Young people are not allowed in the store. That's, old people are more susceptible to the COVID virus. So I go in there at 6 o'clock. They allow people who are only 60 in there. That's a little young, but anyway, they're all old people there. And so there's lots of room. And when I buy my groceries, I go to the same checkout counter and where there's the same guy. The first time I knew he was Mexican, I could tell his name was Fidel. So of course I started to speak Spanish to him. He answered me in English. Oh, guy. Okay, that happens. So then I spoke to him in Spanish, and I said in Spanish, mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. ¿Tú puedes ayudarme? I said, my goal is to speak Spanish the way you do. And I use the vous form, which meant it could be all kinds of people. And I said, please help me. That warmed his heart. Oh, I'll be happy to help you because I'm honoring the Spanish language and the Mexican culture. We're still buddies. We're still friends. I go there every Friday. And here's what I've noticed. He speaks a little faster to me each time. He uses the Spanish is a little more idiomatic because he listens to me. And he sees that I'm getting better. And he's starting to joke around a little bit. So this is the best kind of test. That's the only test I'm taking. I only speak Spanish once a week for 3 minutes. That's about all. It doesn't come from speaking. It comes from the stories I've been reading. Occasionally I'll say something in Spanish to the people at Subway sandwiches, but that's about it. Okay. So my advice to you is to give in to the temptation. Do what you want to do anyway, and try speaking other languages to people. Find people who will help you, who will talk to you, tell them you're interested in getting better, make friends, and it's exciting, at least for people like us. It's totally amazing. Okay, so that's the monitor hypothesis, the comprehension hypothesis, and the compelling input hypothesis. You see, this way, I told you I'd make your life a little more interesting, more pleasant. This way, the only methods that really work are the ones that are pleasant. We don't like boredom. The mind hates boredom. Frank Smith says you can be in one of three states. You can be bored, you can be confused, or you can be learning. So that's what we want, learning in the general sense. We don't want to be bored or confused.
We need a sense of humor like you.
Okay, now you made me self-conscious. I need to tell a joke. I don't know what all right. Language acquisition, other features that I will need to express now. Language acquisition doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. It happens slowly. Research from the University of Illinois, a team headed up by Richard Anderson, who's done wonderful work in first language acquisition. If you're reading or listening and you come to a word you don't know, and there's context, the context will help you, but only a little bit each time. Each time you see the word or you hear it, you get a little bit, maybe 5%, that's all. That's so helpful because our teachers expect us to get the whole thing right away. We've learned now that's not true. You get a little bit, keep listening, it will come back. That's why I try not to look up words when I'm reading if I understand the context. If it's important, it will come back. If it's not important, you didn't need it anyway. Okay. Again, Steve Kaufman has been our therapist here. He's so interesting. When he's reading, someone says, do you look up words you don't know? He says, not too often. He says, when I do, by the time I go back to the text, I've usually forgotten them. Same with me, same with you, same with all of us. So what you want is compelling books where you don't look words up. You simply gradually acquire them. You start seeing them again and again. We have replicated this research in second language in our studies. This turns out to be the same thing. Each time you see it, you get a little book, a little bit, etc. Now, this has been criticized. This has been criticized. We are told not to trust context. Context can fool you. Yeah, it can sometimes. Sometimes the context isn't very helpful and can push you in the wrong direction. The one that people like is this one. You see a picture. I have to find the screen here. You see a picture. backwards in my motion. Let's see, I can't do.
Okay. Yes, we can
See a
make it
picture of a
again.
man, of a man pointing. Okay. See a picture of a man pointing. Now, does that mean hand? Does that mean finger? Does it mean over there? Does it mean pointing? You don't know. The context gives you a little bit of the idea, but not the whole thing. It turns out when you do analyses of context, most of them give you some help. Not the entire meaning, but a little bit. Very few of them, in one study, only 8% were what they called not helpful, leading you in the wrong direction. Misdirective, they call it. But most of them are helpful, some are neutral, but some keep helping you. Some help you. And those are the ones we want. And I have found if I do a lot of reading by the same author and on the same topic, which you want to do anyway because you like the author and you like the topic, context is going to be even more helpful. Okay. I like reading science fiction. And I found a couple of authors I like in French. And they have their favorite words, I've noticed. So they keep coming back. And that kind of juices up the system a little bit. Let me talk about application in general. And here I'm giving you a book report on the work of Beniko Mason. I'm really representing her work, which I think is just amazingly helpful. The claim is that we go through predictable stages in language acquisition. This works for first and second. These are practical stages. The first stage, stories. The last 10 years, my appreciation for stories has grown. And stories is identical to what we call literature. I have slowly grown to appreciate literature. My wife, whom you see on the wall, majored in literature. Dr. Ashari majored in literature. Okay. I didn't. I took classes in French and German literature eventually, but I wanted to get the language. I had it all wrong. Later, I figured out I should be reading things I like and not the classics and all that. But I've grown to appreciate stories. Here's what we know. The beginning stage of first language development, and all of you know this if you're parents or your aunts and uncles, you know all about this. Stories. Children love to hear stories. 95% of children interviewed in studies say they love it when mommy, daddy, their teachers, their aunts, their uncles, all this, tell them stories. 5% don't like it. Those are the ones whose storytellers don't like to tell stories to them. So you get a few people like that. It's kind of hard to believe. As a parent, it's wonderful to tell stories to your kids, your grandchildren. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so kids like it. And the ones who hear the most stories at home or at school or wherever do better in school. They have larger vocabularies. They know more about the world. This is literature. Literature is gold. You know, it used to be, I'll have to insert this, when you look at research on libraries, which I like to do, about 60, 70 years ago, there was an active campaign against interesting fiction. The students shouldn't have just stories. That's just for fun. They should read things that teach them something. Nonfiction. I disagree with that now. If we're serious, as I'll argue, we want more and more fiction. Fiction is the core of language acquisition. Let me tell you about second language and stories. Beniko Mason has based her methodology. Go to benikomason.net. Okay, beniko.mason-net. You'll find her. And you can find her on my website as well. Studies show that the way she does it, she tells a story. This is for English as a foreign language in Japan, where she did the original research. You tell stories in class to adult beginners, adult intermediates, stories that, as she has said, have stood the test of time. She likes Grimm's fairy tales, for example, which are really interesting, and the more ordinary fairy tales, etc. My favorite, Snow White, is still there, and all this, and fascinating. The Three Little Pigs is my absolute favorite. Let's talk about that someday. She makes them comprehensible by preparing in advance. She finds the words and expressions in advance that she thinks might cause problems, and she makes a list of what she calls prompters, things that she'll have to prepare. She'll draw a picture. She'll explain a little more. She'll use context. She may even translate into Japanese. No problem. A very quick translation, etc. Her studies have compared what happens, vocabulary growth, just from stories, where the students don't know they're learning vocabulary. They're just hearing a good story. They're focused on the meaning of the story. And what happens when you add vocabulary learning exercises? Draw a line from the word to the definition, okay? Fill in the blank, etc. Do the kids do better? Yeah, they do. But it's not efficient. When you look at the number of words learned per unit time, learning the stories is much more efficient. So when you finish a good story in class, her advice is, don't do vocabulary exercises, tell another story. It's more fun, etc. I bought a number of books, and I can't buy books anymore, nobody can. But I bought a number of books, stories in Spanish, stories in French. I found them in the bookstore, I got it. Nice stories, pretty good for beginners. Afterwards, a list of exercises. No. You guys who write these stories, you're good at it. Please write more stories for us. That's really what we need. So this is the idea in beginning language acquisition stories. The second stage is reading. I want to tell you the overall results first of what we know about reading. This is a hypothesis that has us hypnotized. It's so amazing. We've been looking at it in all areas of language acquisition. Books, access to books. We've looked at it in first language, second language. Now we're looking at it in heritage language, etc. Let me give you some, I'm just going to give you a couple of spectacular results, just a few. One comes from Benico Mason, and this is with her intermediate students. She teaches a class of English students, and at the end of the class, stories in class and reading graded readers at home, some of the students asked if she would continue with them, could be helping them find books, etc., giving them advice, just to be their monitor, their helper. She said, sure, but do something for me. Keep a record of the books you read, and let me see the record, and take alternate versions of a test. And the test she chose, all of you know this, the TOEFL. The TOEFL exam is the TOEFL and the, the TOEIC. The TOEIC is more widely spread than the TOEFL. The TOEIC is very widely used exam, and she used the listening comprehension and the reading comprehension parts of the TOEIC. Here is what Dr. Mason found, and you'll find the article on my website, her website, etc. We estimated how many hours the students read based on what they read, and we looked at their TOEIC scores. For every hour they read, they gained more than a half a point on the TOEIC. Wow. The last time she did it, it was 0.7 of a point, okay? You read for 100 hours, you're gonna pick up 60, 70 points, okay? You read every day for a couple of hours for a year, you go all the way from the bottom levels of the TOEIC to the upper levels, reading books you like, having a good time. Sitting, Jeff McQuillan wrote a paper called The Starbucks Method of Acquiring Vocabulary. He said, go to Starbucks, order a coffee, and read for pleasure. And he compared that to what happens if you go to a special school and you work hard and you suffer and you do vocabulary. This is much better. So this stuff really does work. And I've been experimenting with myself, as I've told you, in my other languages. I try to do most of my pleasure reading in other languages and choose books that I want to read anyway, which for me is usually science fiction, okay? And it's so much fun, and you grow in vocabulary. One more study. Then what? I'm not giving you the whole research, just some. Study done at the University of London. there's a research team in London who's been looking at the same group of people since they were babies. And the last time they tested them, they were 42 years old. And they gave them a test of English vocabulary, native speakers of English, and questionnaires. The best predictor by far, reading, the kind of reading that won, you know the answer, fiction. Fiction reading keeps winning. This is the part I really want you to take home with you after this discussion. Fiction keeps reading. Fiction did better than nonfiction. Vocabulary was better. And it wasn't just how much vocabulary they had when they were a child. It's what they were reading as a child. It's what they were reading now. Not what they were reading as teenagers or when they were younger. When what they were reading at age 42 really counts. This you can improve at any age. When I turn 42, I'm going to start reading. That's my idea. Okay. Jeff McQuillan has written a paper on this. The title is terrific. Where do we get our academic vocabulary? Comparing the efficiency of direct instruction and free voluntary reading. He did a research study, looked at all the papers, reading won every single time, no question. One of the studies he quoted adds more, is typical of the studies. It's reading for adults. One author looked at all the science fiction that you could read in a year's worth of pleasure reading in science fiction. He found, the author was two authors found half of all the academic words you need to understand science in all areas of science were there in science fiction, and they appeared at least 10 times, enough for acquisition. I think you can read between the lines and see what's going on here. This is a real threat, and I can't help it, to what we call English for academic purposes. It may be there's an easier way. Wow. Read for pleasure in areas you like. Okay, that's not all. We have just started. I got a couple more things to say about reading fiction. This gets better and better. Studies from University of Michigan, Keith Stanovich. People who read fiction know more than other people. They know more about, he looked at fiction readers. They know more about literature. That makes sense. They know more about history. They know more about science. Are you listening, Donald Trump? I'm probably not. Okay. They know more about everything because they are fiction readers. This is where we get our knowledge. Even more, it gets even better. It gets even better. Articles that appeared in Scientific American recently, I saw them there and I read the originals. People who read fiction, you know I was going to say that, people who read fiction have more sophisticated habits of mind. They are less likely to jump to conclusions. They recognize the world is complicated and they're much more patient. Donald Trump takes the most obvious, simple conclusions to everything, like we'll build a wall, this stuff. By the way, it is my patriotic duty to criticize the American president. Theodore Roosevelt said this 100 years ago. He says, you must criticize the president. If you don't, then it is treason. You must do this. So that's what I'm doing. And I have written him about my opinions. He hasn't answered so far. Anyway, people who read fiction know more. They know more about all these areas. They have more sophisticated habits of mind. They don't rush to solutions, and they have more empathy. Again, fiction helps. If you read a good fictional novel, you become the hero. You become the protagonist. You face the same problems the protagonists face, okay? Nishan, do you remember the computer guy we visited the other day?
Richard?
Yeah,
Yes.
Richard. I went in there again and we talked about comic books again.
Nice.
Yeah, he and I both are admirers of Marvel comic books. And I told him a story that came from a Marvel comic which had a powerful message, a powerful, powerful message of how to get along with people, how to solve problems, all through the person of Peter Parker. And the message was everybody has problems. And Peter Parker expressed this very well. One of the characters says, "Oh, you're a superhero. Spider-Man, you don't have problems." And Spider-Man started thinking about his problems. And his conclusion was, everybody has problems. It's every day, all day. And we grow by solving our problems, not by running away. This is in a comic book, which is today's literature for young people, which I find to be absolutely fascinating. So, how does Benico do this then? How do we get people into reading? First, we're going into stage 2 now. Stage 1, we have them read stories, or we tell them stories in class, which she calls it story listening. And we gradually introduce them into reading. And I find this to be one of Dr. Mason's great ideas, and she's had many. The initial stage of sort of intermediate level, when you get into reading, is reading stories. Not just one story. I remember my high school French class. It was torture. By the way, I got to tell you how I did in that class in high school. The world famous Steve Krashen was my teacher, gave me a passing grade if I promised never to study French again, especially at that school, because I was so terrible in the class. He didn't want to embarrass me. He was a nice guy. He just didn't know. He gave a grammar class. Okay? And today my French is okay. Pas français comme va espagnol. Okay. Anyway, the way I took French, the first lesson in French, I remember the story from the first class. The stories in traditional language teaching are not designed to be interesting. They're designed to help you practice the new vocabulary. And they're all incredibly boring. All about the family, Monsieur et Madame Dupont, and their strange children, which you don't care about. You don't care about them. You don't want to know, but you've got to know about their kids and what they had for lunch. Okay, this has gone away. We have now graded readers. What Benico has said is the first stage, and I've introduced this to you already, is reading lots and lots and lots of very easy texts, which I have been doing with Spanish. Not one, not two, hundreds of them. Her students at the university in Japan read several hundred graded readers in English. Isn't that comfortable? You know, you're thinking of yourself, how easy that would be. What a relief it would be to read novels that are not challenging, that are easy to understand, and they're becoming more interesting. I have found that several authors now in Spanish are writing books that are pretty good, even though they're designed. You know, Adriana Ramirez, I've read her books, they're very good. And our colleague Bill Van Patten, who's a well-known scholar, has been writing easy, interesting books in Spanish. So this is the new trend. They're making them more interesting, more fun. So I think we're heading now into a new golden age of literature for language students. They start with this from the very first day. They do simple, authentic reading for several years. My final comment on this before we go to other topics, if we want this to work, we need access. Access to books, lots of them. Here is an inspiring statistic, and then I'll give you a depressing statistic. Dr. Mason at her university in Japan, her students had access to a library of graded readers of 5,000 books. Wow. This is not true anywhere that I have seen. It's not true in foreign language programs. It's not true in second language programs. It's not true in bilingual programs. Dr. Ashtari has been doing some work in this area. I'll just give her an introduction and ask her to say a couple of words on this. We've looked at Spanish, which is a very good example in the United States in bilingual education. We want to build the first language because it's found to be very, very helpful. And you would think there'd be lots of books available in Spanish in Southern California and Los Angeles with all these Spanish-speaking people. We've looked at libraries. Sandra Pucci, my former student, has gone to libraries in Spanish-speaking areas where it's a bilingual school, you go to the library, very little in Spanish, practically nothing. Let's go to the opposite extreme, a language that's somewhat popular in Los Angeles, but doesn't get its presence felt in the literature. What's going on with Persian, otherwise known as Farsi? Kids, there are kids who speak Persian at home, Farsi, but they don't speak it very well after a couple of years. So what's the book situation? I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Ashtari for, you only get 30 seconds. This is my speech. No, for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Anytime you want.
Yeah, of course. I mean, your talks are always so fascinating. I'm just all ears all the time. So thank you so much, Professor Krashen. And you're completely right. Even in a language like Spanish, which has the highest number of speakers after English in the world, we don't have enough materials for anyone, even heritage language speakers or second language speakers in general. And that is also true about Persian or Farsi, which is my native language. I was born and raised in Iran. And when I came to the US, I realized that a lot of second or third generation Iranian Americans don't speak Farsi or don't use Farsi in their households, but a lot of families expressed the desire that they wanted their children to Farsi, and the children, when they grew older, they always had this feeling that they always wanted to acquire their heritage language as well. It felt like a piece of them was missing, which was echoed in different areas that they were saying. And I wanted to see what is going on in this area of Farsi as a heritage language, and it turned out to be 100% true, as Professor Krashen said, that there is not enough materials, there's not enough comprehensible and compelling materials for Farsi acquirers to acquire the language. We analyzed the databases of 72 Los Angeles public library systems, and we found out that for the 500,000 to 1 million Iranians and Iranian Americans living in this area of Los Angeles, because after the Iranian Revolution, many Iranians came to the US, and many of them resided in this area, Los Angeles, and it got its nickname of Tehrangeles, or Little Persia. And we found that for the 500,000 to 1 million Iranian Americans living in this area, there's only about 300 books in all of the libraries combined. And even out of those 300 books, 12 of them were taken out of the library. So that means that they're not really, even the ones that we have, they're not really compelling or interesting enough for anyone to use them. And they said that we actually got inspiration from one of the amazing researchers that Professor Krashen talked about throughout the talk, Professor Jeff McQuillan, and we use this method called unobtrusive measure, which is a fascinating method. One of the areas that they do that I thought it was a great example is that before we had everything kind of numerical and we had all the data, they would see what in a museum, they would see what exhibition was the most popular by seeing the wear and tear on the tiles of the museum. So if there were many people coming and going, they would know that this exhibition has been the most popular and a lot of people are going to this exhibit, so they would have more of those exhibitions in there. And when it comes to our major and our field, one of the studies was that you could see even the books that you have at home, or if you go to a library and if you take out a book, because there are so many people coming in and out and turning the pages of these books, you can kind of see on what page the readers are stopped because of, for example, if there are any smudges, any wrinkled corners, any, for example, coffee or tea stains even. And you can see what was the last page that was read. And we wanted to see, okay, now we know that only a few books have been taken out, 12 books from the libraries. And we wanted to see how much of these books have actually been read. And we found out that in Farsi, it was only 5% of the books. So only a few pages of these books, Farsi acquisition, Farsi learning and teaching books have been read by the readers. So that means that they're not interesting enough, compelling enough, rich enough, and abundant enough criteria for the optimal input that Professor Krashen and Professor Mason brought forth again in 2020 in their paper. That is also part of the handouts that you can see, that they're not really any of those for the Farsi acquirers. And that is not only unique to Farsi, that is across the board in all languages, including English. So things that we might not necessarily think about, but they are true across the board.
Perfect.
Okay.
The obvious comment now, before we go on, what about easy, interesting books in English in Morocco? Let's use these methods that you just heard. Dr. Ashri,
okay.
Let's use the wear and tear method. Let's see what books are available in libraries. Let's take care of English, then we'll go to Berber, okay? Go to other languages in Morocco that we want to. This is a very good idea.
Okay.
I'm told, by the way, that 1/3 of the population of Morocco speaks French.
Yeah, so sure.
If you want to support that, which is important, exciting, interesting, let's make sure easy, interesting French. French get very serious. We have to watch out for that. Okay.
Yeah, actually, Moroccans speak French, English, and of course Berber. Majority of people are Berber. Yeah, Berber. So maybe they are multilingual. We can say they are multilingual.
Well, I want to have a print-rich environment in all these languages, including, of course, Arabic, where the barrier for kids is usually, the formal language to the formal system. So let's make sure popular literature is there in all 4 languages, easy to read, easy to understand, because we value the classics, because we want them to read the great philosophers. Let's give them hours and hours of pleasure reading in all these languages.
Yeah, by the way, just for your information, in Morocco, we have what is called Moroccan Arabic, what is called Darija, and the Standard Arabic, the language of Quran and poetry, the Arabic poetry. So that's why our mother tongue is Moroccan Arabic and not Standard Arabic. So we learn Standard Arabic at school. And maybe it's
from reading too. Yes.
Yes. So thank you very much for your informative and interesting talk. And thank you, Professor Stephen Krashen, that you summarized the results of your research that you have done over the 50 years. Maybe we are running more than 1 hour. I'm going to ask you some direct questions or comment on what you have said. We know that we acquire language when we understand it. So here, a quick question. So what do you think about those teachers in the classroom who use grammar translation method? They use their first language to facilitate the learning process. So is it applicable? Do you think it's a good way to learn a new language? And the second question is, yes, my second question is, do you think that classes are great places to get comprehensible input?
Okay, they're really the same question.
Yeah.
The classrooms are wonderful. Classroom is the best place to get comprehensible input. The outside world is not going to give beginners comprehensible input. Very difficult. I've reached the point in Spanish where I'm intermediate, kind of, and I can get comprehensible input from the outside world. I really don't need classes anymore. I can still make progress because I can have conversations, read some things. But in other languages, for example, in Chinese, in Mandarin, where I've had some classes and I can have very basic, I need a class. I've had 3 successful conversations in my life with real people in the outside world. Most of the time I'm absolutely hopeless. Okay, I need a class. Nushan, you know who the master teacher is, Hayun, our friend.
Absolutely.
We get by with a little help from our friends. Okay, so the classroom is wonderful. You can't go out in the street. If you're a beginner, it's very, very hard. What to do in class? Comprehensible input. A little grammar if people are curious occasionally, And it's not like against the law, but it's not the foundation of the class. For children, forget it. Don't even bother. Make it interesting, exciting, and compelling, and you won't have to worry about grammar. Later on, if you want to do some, they did a study in Canada, very interesting, in Montreal, where they use both French and English. And they looked at children in French classes, English kids studying French kids in English classes. What percentage enjoy the study of grammar? In both cases, 5%. 95% of the children hated it. Unfortunately, my guess is that the 5% who liked it were the ones who became language teachers. I love grammar, so I got a PhD in linguistics, okay? But I'm not normal. I know that. I'm a member of a very strange group. I would not worry about grammar for beginners and especially not for children. Comprehensible input. Great question. Thank you.
And just to add to that, I think all of us can find examples of our own experiences of going through grammar translation, especially through our K through 12. Our second language in Iran was Arabic, and I took Arabic for 7 years through my K through 12, and we did grammar translation all throughout. And I know that here in the US it's either Spanish or French, as you said. And in all these different countries, you always have a second language through your K through 12 system, but none of us really acquire much. We might have some basic understandings, a few words here and there, but if we had to spend those 7 of language instruction in a classroom that had comprehensible input, I believe most of us could acquire a second language. So,
well, I have some way out of this one, because the same thing happened to me with Hebrew. Yeah. I went to Hebrew school. Oh my gosh. I learned the alphabet and I maybe remembered 10 words and prayers. And this is like same with you, 7 years. I started until I was bar mitzvah. Then I studied Hebrew. I took classes. Went to Israel. Was on a kibbutz where we had Hebrew lessons and then we went and worked, which was great fun. It was a grammar class, but the teacher was so good. She made everything interesting, everything compelling. When I came home from Israel after 5 months, not only could I speak Hebrew, okay, but I understood synagogue more. I understood much more of the prayers, much more. And I had a much deeper understanding of Judaism and the religion and the philosophy, okay? Unfortunately, I have to report to you my failure. I have not influenced Jewish education, okay? I've been trying to tell them that occasionally you find someone here and there, but there's hope, a little bit of conversational class, or let's say compelling comprehensible input. And Dr. Ashtari, I hope that happens to you someday, where you get a little bit of comprehensible input in Arabic, and then the religion will just open up, okay?
We have decided that we're going to, exactly, I was going to say, we have decided as a group that we're going to acquire Arabic, so.
I'm
happy to help you learn Arabic, standard Arabic, even Moroccan Arabic darija.
شكرا حبيبي. Okay.
شكرا. مرحبا لا شكرا على واجب. So and I'm going to ask you to help me how to teach you.
Okay. The first thing you do is look at the works of Benico Mason for stage 1, and I'll direct.
Interesting. Actually, we have many questions. I don't know because you have covered many of them implicitly. But let's move on to talk about another issue that is of bilingualism or many languages. So, is it possible to learn more than one language?
I think people do it all the time.
So at the same time, I mean, at the same time.
Yes. For me, again, experimenting with myself, I'm not only working on Spanish, okay? I'm doing all of them all the time. When I can get comprehensible input in one of the languages, I run for it. It's wonderful. Reading, I used to alternate French and German. Now I alternate French, German, and Spanish. Why not? And when
You can switch.
if the book is compelling and interesting, yes. The problem is finding beginning stuff that's like that. But you're going to help me with Arabic, okay? And we're all going to go on to Farsi, right?
Yes.
We're all
Yes.
going to go on to Persian. Okay, very good. So this is so. The brain doesn't. The brain doesn't make any difference when you get. If I get comprehensible input in German, and I haven't looked at it in a while, the brain automatically starts processing it. The brain automatically starts acquiring German. You can't stop it. Not only can you do it, but we do it very well.
Professor Stephen, can you give us some tips or advice we follow to how to learn these languages at the same time?
Well, when you're at the intermediate stage, that's easy. Find interesting things to read. I will read a book in another language because of the book, not because of what language it's in. Okay, and the problem, as we heard from Dr. Ashtari, is finding those books. They're not there. Even here in the United States, I find it difficult to find good books in Spanish, even at the public libraries in Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. This is the problem. In the beginning, because we now have the internet and we now know about distance learning, again, this is a topic Dr. Ashtari has been talking about lately. It comes up all the time. What do we do in the age of COVID? I think we can do very well. The things we can continue to do now in, say, language class, if you want to say, help us get comprehensible input in Arabic, are the ones that count. If you become our Arabic teacher and you give us comprehensible, compelling input in Arabic and tell us stories, that's all we need. We can't answer you back, but that doesn't matter. You can't correct our errors, but that doesn't matter. You can still give us compelling, comprehensible input, and that's the only thing that counts. So the COVID catastrophe for us could be a blessing for language teaching. This is all we need. The Farsi hour every Tuesday from 2 o'clock till 3. You can hear, Dr. Ashtari tell interesting stories in easy Farsi. We've got it.
Okay. In the same vein, Professor Krashen, which way you encourage most in learning a new language? Taking classes or self-teaching, or both?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. You can do it by self-teaching means getting comprehensible input. It means finding interesting things to read and finding a source of good input. Once you get a little bit advanced, you can watch cartoons. I can't wait till I get that good in languages. Children's cartoons are brilliant, in my opinion. SpongeBob is absolutely brilliant. Once you reach that stage, you're in business. You can make very rapid progress. So self-teaching is really finding sources of comprehensible input, oral and written.
Yeah, and here we cannot neglect the role of the teacher in the classroom, because sometimes we need the teacher to guide you to what comprehensible input you should choose.
Just like Dr. Mason has done that. You need someone to tell you which ones to tune in, what not to do. Don't worry, you don't have to talk, just listen. If it's too hard, change the station, go to another one, okay?
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that you always mention, Professor Krashen, is that a sign of a good reader is a reader who knows when to let go of a book that they don't enjoy and go to the next one. So it can be a guided self-selected reading, which is GSSR, or it can be something that you choose and you decide that, okay, this is good for me or not. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that as teachers, we can come together and we can create short stories. I think Professor Mason has been doing that with, there's another website called storiesfirst.org, And in that website, you have different languages. And in these different languages, once you go into each folder, you have stories that teachers of those languages have either written themselves or translated from another language. And they're very short. Some of them are even a few sentences. And if as teachers we unite as a group and we create those compelling and comprehensible materials, I think the world of language education in general can be a better place for both students and teachers. So it's both responsibilities on both sides.
Inshallah, my goodness. This is fabulous.
Interesting. So, Professor Krashen, we mentioned yesterday the importance of acquiring new language, especially if in Morocco we have a special case, tourist guides who acquire language easily, but they never attend classes, but they cannot write or maybe read, but they speak fluently and sometimes accurately. So what is your comment on that?
I think this is amazing. What we need to do is study them.
Yes.
This is needed research. All we need, begin with one person who is talkative and social. Okay?
Yes.
We invite this person for coffee, give him a little money, and record it and share it with us. Find out how he has done it, whether it's frustrating, what his problems are, would he recommend other people do it. This is a marvelous area of research.
Actually, it's amazing because they can switch and using different languages at the same time, and they can speak more than 5 languages. I personally know many of them, so it's amazing. I don't know. Here maybe they exposed to language unconsciously, maybe, or and they don't go to school. They don't look for comprehensible input, but just thanks to the interaction with tourists, they become fluent and sometimes accurate. So it's amazing.
A lot of the input will be comprehensible because it's predictable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, like, as a hypothesis, because we talk about reading, but the source of reading is the stories. And I think we talk about this, that humans are made of stories, not of atoms. And if we're talking about tourist guides, they have a lot of input in terms of humans and human interaction and human stories, because when we talk about our life and traveling and all of those are sort of stories. So story listening, which does not have to be a written version, because you're saying that maybe sometimes they don't write or read. It's the source of it is the same. It's something that is interesting to them because they had interaction with other travelers and other tourists, and that becomes their version of comprehensible and compelling input for them, and that helps them have that I+1, so that next time they see another tourist, they're going to have, as you said, with the Mexican store person that you talk to, every time it's a little bit higher. So now they're talking about their family. Next day they might talk about their travels. Next day they might talk about any issues that they had in going to this particular country, and that becomes comprehensible input and I+1 each time, and that brings forth their acquisition of the language, and they get better and better every time. But we definitely need to study it more and talk to each individual.
I make a prediction. They don't go home and study vocabulary lists.
Yeah.
Interesting. So now we are talking about the acquisition and learning of language in general, but I think we didn't mention or talk about the proficiency, native-like proficiency, and this is very important. So do you think, is it possible for an adult learner, let's say more than 18, to acquire a second or foreign language to achieve native-like proficiency?
This is a very interesting question. Maybe a lot of people have done it and we don't know because we think they're native speakers. Some people have gotten, say, English all around me here in California who are, in their 30s, and I thought they were native speakers, but they came here later in life. They're living among us in secret. Okay. So let me point out the obvious, though.
Maybe we have the situation of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, the situation is people like Arnold, people like you two, speak English extremely well, okay?
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm
Really
sorry, it's
appreciate it.
true. I have to, not meant as a compliment, it's professional judgment. In fact, I would bet that for you two, your vocabulary in English is 3 times as large as the President of the United States, no question. Okay,
Wow.
that's not saying much.
Is this flattering?
Yeah, exactly.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's absolutely true. And what is lacking for very advanced people is usually, if it's grammar, it's a very small point here and there, something that's very late acquired, and a little bit of an accent. That's all that even comes and goes, is hardly there. My former student, Francisco Ramos, and I did a paper about Arnold Schwarzenegger, about his English, how he got there, what he said he did and what he really did. He had lots of comprehensible input, no question. His English is fabulous. People say, oh, he has an accent. Listen carefully. It's hardly there at all. He doesn't speak 100% German phonological system. It's very English, just a little tiny bit here and there. His vocabulary is remarkable. His grammar is remarkable. He has given political speeches, is interviewed by the press. So Arnold and you two are very good examples of people like this. We have people who've just about gone all the way or who have gone all the way. So adults are very, very good. Now, in terms of accent, let's talk about that. That was the last frontier. Our view of accent today, and I'm going to state this as a conjecture. The word conjecture is very helpful. I got this from our son, who's a mathematician, and he said, Dad, when you have a hypothesis and you think it may not be right, call it a conjecture. Then if you're wrong, you say, oh, it's only a conjecture, okay? So this is my accent conjecture, but I kind of think it's true. The perfect accent is inside you.
Yeah.
You don't use it because you don't feel right. You feel a little bit silly. It's not quite you. We have, Dr. Ashtari and I have kind of fallen in love with the hypothesis that it's club membership that counts. An idea we got from Frank Smith, that you consider yourself to be a member of the group that speaks the language, and then it comes naturally. Very powerful. I want to give you 2 examples from real life. When I was in Ethiopia, I met a guy who worked for, I think, for the British Embassy. His name was Gerald Mosbeck. I tried to track him down. This is 50 years ago. And it turns out he's in our field. He writes English books, how to teach English, all that stuff, and articles. I've got to find him. Anyway, one day I was talking to him in Addis Ababa, and we were talking about languages. And he told me about his experience with French in high school. And the fact that everybody in his class had to take an oral examination. That's a horrible thing to do to a teenager, okay? Take an oral exam in the second language. And he and his friends despised French class. They hated the language, they hated the culture, they hated the teachers, and of course they hated class. They hated class because it was old-fashioned grammar. But they had an oral exam, and he and his friends decided to insult their teachers. They came into the exam dressed with French clothing, like a beret, okay? And with a little glass of wine, with pretending to be French. And they exaggerated everything French to ridiculous point. Ah, mais oui, monsieur, je sais très bien pas être ici avec vous. And the teachers gave them the highest grades. They said, oh, finally, you've got it. You're speaking French. That's wonderful. And they would have been embarrassed to do that in real life. They couldn't, because they didn't consider themselves members of this group, and they didn't want to be members of the group. There's the story they tell about Peter Ustinov, brilliant British actor, who was known, his best role was in Top Copy, an amazing movie. He was known for his ability to do dialects, and he has done films in French, where he speaks French, and it's brilliant. Native speakers of French say he sounds absolutely French. I've watched these films. I can't always tell if someone's a native speaker, but boy, it sure sounded convincing. When he was interviewed on this, Ustinov said, when I'm in these movies, yeah, I can sound French, but I don't do that in real life. When I meet a French person, I don't suddenly start speaking with the full French accent because it's not me. I'm not a member of that club. So it takes club membership to do this. Accent is a member of a group, who you are. The article that Dr. Ashtari and I have been discussing this last week is an article of boys in middle school in the UK. No, in New England, I'm sorry, in the United States. And it looked at their pronunciation of verbs ending with ing. I'm going, I'm singing, I'm coming. And the boys, the brilliant researcher, his name is Fisher, noticed that they pronounced it differently depending on their personality. One group of boys he called proper boys, model boys. These were the boys who did well in school, well behaved, and they fully pronounced the ing. I'm going, I'm coming, I'm singing, I'm playing. The other boys were the, quote, typical boys, boys who considered themselves to be masculine and tough boys. They said coming, singing, etc. They dropped the full ing, etc. It was a marker of their club membership as to how they regarded themselves as people. Girls were more likely to use the so-called proper form, but not all. Not all. Dr. Ashtari, can I tell our new secret hypotheses?
Yes, please do.
What about girls who consider themselves to be tomboys? A tomboy, yeah. A tomboy is a girl who likes to dress like a boy, act like a boy, not because they have a different sexual identity that may be or may not, but they admire the freedom that the tomboy lifestyle gives you. You're going to examine their language, and I'll bet that they adopt the male speech, which Dr. Ashtari says is true from Farsi as well. So it's your attitude, it's your club membership that does it. I like to draw the analogy with clothing. Clothing does two things: protects you against the environment. It also tells you what club you're a member of. If you're slightly overdressed or slightly underdressed, you don't feel right. So it's very convenient for a tomboy because the boy's clothing is far more comfortable, right? This is exactly it. So there's a real tendency.
Exactly.
There you are.
Maybe there is a theory, I think, that girls pay more attention because they pay attention to their appearance. So the same thing, they pay more attention to their language, and they become fluent and accurate more than boys.
It may be they pay more attention to their club membership.
And monitor hypothesis. I think girls in general learn to monitor themselves, appearance, language, everything. Whereas boys can be boys, it's just.
Yeah, they can, but there's constraints on how I dress. I can't dress like a girl.
Yes.
Okay, and I can't overdress, etc. I have to address. It's very much club membership. I'm glad you steered us back in this direction. In my case, I've been thinking about that, about how I dress, and it depends on the circumstance. I want to dress in this situation. How did I dress today? As an academic, pushing the boundaries a little bit. I don't wear a tie. You look good, Nabil. But I don't
I will try to. Yes. Now here you are. Yeah.
There you go. I love ties.
I try to be as comfortable as I can without violating club membership. Okay? Shoes, I can wear soft shoes, but if they have a red label on them or a stripe, I won't wear that. It's not who I am. So boys were all very, very conscious. And I do brush my hair in the morning. And I do once a week, I brush my teeth too, at least. Okay?
Interesting.
Yeah, okay.
So Professor Krashen, we know that we acquire maybe the first language by imitating first. We imitate. Somehow. Okay.
I
So what
wouldn't
do you
say
think
that.
about?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. What do you think about imitation? When we want to learn, we try to imitate, and maybe we take someone as a model, and we try to imitate him. So
I
do you
think,
think?
I think we do that regardless.
And
We can't help it.
is it a good way to learn a new language?
Don't even
To take
think
someone
about
as a
it.
model?
I would say, don't think about it. You're doing it anyway. You can't help it. Everyone imitates the group that they respect.
And can I add an example that I think a lot of us can relate with? Is the topic of jokes. When we tell jokes, I think each country has different cities and states that have distinct, way of speaking and dialects, and all of us. I think in Iran, I know that in different cities, we tell jokes about different people. Some of them are not very sensitive. Some of them may be, and we can. I think a lot of us can imitate the accent of that particular city, even
Exactly.
in our native
Exactly.
language. But then in our regular speech, we don't, because we don't feel like we belong to that group. We don't identify with that group. We're not part of that club. But we can imitate the accent. But that could be about English too. We can imitate someone that we feel, for example, if there's a speaker, for example, Professor Krashen, who speaks so beautifully. Sometimes some people can imitate and try to be, talking about the way that he does, or a native speaker of another language, German, French, Farsi. And that could be one way. If you feel like you belong, you identify with that person and the way that person speaks, and you think that you want to be part of that club, or you are already part of that club, that could be something.
In fact, actors have to do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way they do it now is a technique called method acting. You find that personality inside yourself. You've already acquired it. Just like, as Dr. Starr says, you've acquired the dialect, say, of a neighboring community. You don't use it. But if you were hired as an actress, which I think is inevitable for you when you're discovered, you'll be in the movies, and you have to talk like someone from another city in the United States or Iran or whatever,
Yeah.
You become that personality that's already there inside. It's impossible to learn. And it comes out. You don't do it all day long, but that's method acting. You become that person, but it's already there. Find the part inside you. There's the famous scenes that actors talk about, like you're about to have a scene where you have to be very angry and upset. And the actress goes up to the director and says, "Please slap me across the face." Then I can do it. Okay. Because it's already
Interesting.
there. Yeah,
Thank you. We are running more than 1 hour 37 minutes. It's amazing. Okay, and people are still watching and following this amazing and historic event. Let's move on to talk about another issue, maybe out of place, that is of the language of animals. What about the language of animals? We understand them, actually. They understand us.
They do a good
Maybe
job.
they are good acquirers. Yeah, they do a good job.
So who's smarter? They have a
I think they are.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your question.
Yeah, this is my question. What do you think about the language of animals? Do you think that they acquire our language? Because sometimes when we give order in Arabic or in French or in English, they understand. And if you give them the order in another language, they don't understand. I think here they understand our language. So what do you think?
I will look for your next paper on this. I think that's a great study.
Wow,
interesting. They don't. It's not just your tone of voice; it's the language. That's great.
I have a cat. If you want to apply this, I'm ready to help you.
Cats are wonderful. Oh my gosh. Okay, we know a lot about animals acquiring human language.
Wow.
It's all been in the last 20, 30 years. I do recommend a book. Sean, as soon as I'm done with this book, I'm going to loan it to you. I feel guilty. Okay?
Thank you. No, don't worry. But I look forward to reading it.
Yeah. It's a book by Roger Fouts, Fouts. It's called Next of Kin, and it's about chimpanzees, the language of chimpanzees. He's a professional animal specialist, and he's worked with chimpanzees, and he has taught them sign language, along with what's her name? Jane Goodall. He's worked with her as well. And they do speak sign language. Washoe, the main chimp. By the way, Washoe. By the way, Dr. Ashtari, your newest best friends, my daughter and son-in-law, Elan and Debbie, have visited Washoe when she was alive in Washington, and they taught the people at the place how to communicate with them in sign. They actually did that. Can you imagine? So the animals actually have fairly sophisticated conversations. They teach their children sign. The animals do. Washoe taught Lulis, her adopted son, sign language. This is quite something. They have found with animals that, with chimps, that they can acquire about 120, 130 different signs and a little bit of basic grammar. Very interesting. I did a paper, you can look on my website and look at a paper called Cosmo, of a parrot who was able to do this.
Yeah.
Cosmo, an African gray parrot, Cosmo lives with a retired professor of comparative literature, University of Georgia. And I was told that my son was teaching there at the time, so I got to meet Cosmo with my grandchildren. We actually went to the house. Cosmo understands and speaks the English we're speaking. Go to YouTube, type in Cosmo. And
Cosmo, how do you spell it?
Cosmo, and you will see Cosmo actually speaking. Cosmo will come out with whole discourses. For example, Mary Jean Craig, the professor there, would go into her room, and Cosmo would say, "Oh, Cosmo poop. Cosmo poop today. Cosmo good bird. Cosmo poop in cage." And then Jack says this the way I'm telling you. Then Cosmo will, the next day, will say, "Cosmo bad bird. Cosmo poop on floor." Real conversations, no kidding. Now, what Cosmo's had is loving, accepting, comprehensible input from this one person that absolutely loves her. And they talk every day, all day long. So the conditions for language acquisition are met. Now, there's something fascinating. Many, many years ago, I worked on a case of a child who acquired her first language as a teenager. Jeannie, an isolated child subject to the most awful parental abuse, was locked in her room for no good reason. And she started acquiring language when we discovered her, a team, and her best friend became Susie Curtis, who became the lead writer and researcher of this. And Susie spent hours and hours with her. And Jeannie started acquiring language. We did neurological tests, which were very uninvasive and very actually fun. And we discovered that Jeannie was using the right side of her brain, not the left. So, which we now think has, from other studies, we know the right side, you remove the left side in adults for epilepsy, the right side can do some language acquisition. Jeannie got some language acquisition, about the same as Cosmo and Washoe. So maybe in animals, the whole brain is operating like the human right side. So this is fascinating. What's important to us, though, is that it's possible. And it's done with pretty much the same system. I've done a review of animal language. You can see it on my website. And it is pretty close to fitting that it's comprehensible input that does it, and it's context that makes it comprehensible, and it's the caring relationship that counts. And this is also how animals pick up signaling systems from older animals. So the same process pretty much might be there. Now, only one researcher besides me has been examining this hypothesis, someone who worked on, parrots, and has found pretty much the same thing, that they do pick up things that they haven't been taught, and they get them from comprehensible input. So it might be a good area for research.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this informative and interesting talk. Maybe before we finish, I would like you to ask you a general question about your recommendations for teachers and students who would like to learn a new language in general. for teachers, let's say, to make their teaching, let's say, efficient and successful, and for learners who would like to learn a new language, not only English. So what is your recommendation for them or advice?
Well, I wish the world were more cooperative and make it easy for us. I wish I could say, go to a class for beginners that emphasizes comprehensible input. And you don't find that many. You find a few that claim to be natural approach. An early version of comprehensible input is pretty good. And they like to combine it with grammar and rules. They like to be eclectic, which is not going to be the best way, okay? I wish they could be like these people on the street who pick it up through talking, but that's a slow way. I don't have a good recommendation for total beginners. My hope is that these comprehensible input-based classes will spread and will become free, just like libraries, free and available to everybody. Just like information should be free, that you can turn on your television or computer. I got time, I want to do 30 minutes of Farsi today. So I can, and I want someone to tell me about, life in the supermarket, or tell me a story about their children, or read me a book, and you can dial it up and find it. That's ideal. Someday we're going to get there. We have to start somewhere though. Then
Interesting.
If you're an intermediate, start reading. Find easy books, real easy. Do what Beniko Mason said. Find lots and lots of extremely, extremely easy books for beginners and keep reading them, and you'll get better.
Interesting. Okay, Professor Krashen, can you please tell us about your future research and publications?
Let me quote famous American baseball player, Yogi Berra.
Okay.
It's hard to predict, especially about the future. Okay. I have no idea. You have an idea what we're working on now, because I couldn't help but talking about it. The ideas that Dr. Ashtari has that I have that we've been doing. We've shared some with you, but stay tuned. That's all I can tell you. We don't really know until it gets moving. And it's amazing how much good work there is left to be done. Take a look at my website. Take a look at Dr. Ashtari's work on ResearchGate. Look at the people we quote and talk about, and you'll be overflowing with good ideas. Okay, that's what I suggest.
Thank you very much.
And
yes, any comments,
effort.
Dr. Ashtari? Yeah.
Yes,
Anything to add,
join
Dr.
the
Ashtari?
efforts. Exactly. I was going to say, these are the things that we're working on and we've worked on before, but join the effort and we can move forward with everything.
Okay,
Exactly.
Professor Krashen, maybe this is the last question I would like to ask, and maybe at the end of an interview, how would you like to be remembered?
This reminds me of a story. Bob Hope, famous American comedian, brilliant. He was on his deathbed. Really happened. His daughters were next to him. They said, "Dad, where would you like to be buried?" His answer surprised me.
Surprise me. Exactly. I love that one.
I don't know about being remembered. I'm too busy doing the work right now. I've never thought about it. I really don't care. Okay. Well, I'll be off.
Okay.
Something else.
Thank you very much for this informative talk. Actually, we enjoyed talking to you today. Maybe let's go to the virtual audience for their questions. If you have any other question that is not, let's say, covered, please ask Dr. Krashen before we conclude this webinar. If you have any other questions, direct questions, quick questions, please, you can ask them here directly. But please don't ask the same questions, maybe for those who are new. You can ask your questions in Arabic, in French, in German, and in Arabic, and we'll try to translate to you.
Okay.
And Farsi.
Farsi.
Yeah, Farsi. Okay, no problem. Yeah, by the way, many people are watching us from different parts of the world, not only from Morocco. We have from Iraq, we have from Iran, we have from US, from China, from Lebanon, from Dubai, from of course, Morocco, different parts of Morocco, many places from Europe, France, and other parts. Yeah. Okay. Any question, please, before we? Yes. I'm trying to, because I see that you, Professor Krashen, you have covered all the issues. So it was a really interesting webinar. Hopefully will be beneficial for everybody. Yes, study. Please, quick questions. Otherwise, we call it a day. Yes, I'm from Germany, from Emirates, from Syria. Wow, different. From Brazil. Oh, interesting. Peru. Wow, interesting. From Panama. Wow. So different nationalities. Okay. Yes. Any question, please? Does age matter in language learning? I think he already answered this question.
Right.
Maybe here I have another question from a researcher in applied linguistics, and he wants you to talk about the explicit and implicit learning, the difference between explicit and implicit learning, and which one you encourage most.
Okay. I think that explicit learning is a synonym for what I call acquisition. Implicit learning is a synonym. I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Let me wake up. Where's my coffee? Explicit learning is conscious learning. Implicit learning is what we call acquisition. So for some reason, people were reluctant to use acquisition learning. They called it implicit, explicit, maybe because it agrees more with the professional literature. And to restate it, it's implicit is the name of the game. Implicit just overwhelms explicit. Explicit can be satisfying for people who love language. If you tell people the rules, a small percentage, 5%, will absolutely love it. But it's not doing you that much good.
And can I talk about one of the best videos that has been ever made in the history of humankind, which is a conversation between Professor Krashen and Professor Chomsky on implicit and explicit knowledge, which is on his YouTube channel. So Stephen Krashen's YouTube channel, you can watch that. It's only 6 minutes, but they specifically talk about explicit and implicit knowledge, and that they both agree that
I know it's a 6 minutes conversation. It's amazing, and I downloaded it and uploaded it on my Facebook page, and everyone is watching it. It's interesting. It's just 6 minutes conversation. So I have it on my Facebook page. Everyone is watching. More than 70,000 people who watch that. Yeah, more than that, because I have the statistics. Yeah, it's interesting.
It was very satisfying. It was satisfying that Professor Chomsky was such a careful listener of everything. He is still the master. It's amazing. And also, I got to thank him at the end. How can you thank Noam Chomsky enough for what he's done for us? That was really good after that. Yeah, thanks.
I was honored
to. So the combination of you two.
It was a really historical event. I was honored to interview Professor Noam Chomsky 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was amazing. Actually, he was a great listener. I appreciate him.
On COVID
and he is very intelligent. I really appreciate him. Wish him a long life.
He is the most cited person in the world.
Yeah, sure.
Most cited living person in the world. And he's the only case I know of someone who is a total master of 2 completely different fields.
Yeah.
Mainly, we say political science, history, and linguistics.
And linguistics at the same time.
Wow.
Mind blowing. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Maybe pick up another question. Here, so maybe all questions already covered. Many questions, but the same thing. Yeah, here someone is talking about the psychological barriers. How can we avoid them in learning a new language? The psychological barriers.
The easy way, compelling input.
Compelling input.
The more
Yeah.
interesting the input is, the less you're thinking about yourself.
Yeah, here maybe we ask the same question. So, do you think that teachers help and facilitate the learning process?
Yes, certainly. Easy way is, of course, compelling, comprehensible input. And it's also what you don't do. Correction, testing. I read an interview where one student said, language class is like a constant test. And it's a test of what you've learned. And it's very hard to produce those things. So it causes a lot of stress. I would say, don't worry about constant correction. Minimum evaluation, absolute rock bottom. Don't make students talk before they're ready. And keep it interesting. Just that enough will do a lot.
And one more thing, if that's okay to mention, in the study in the 2014 study that we talked about a few days ago, the
Thank you. That's
reaction of speakers. So it's not when we're having a conversation we're about language, we're talking about listeners and speakers both. So our reactions as listeners, as teachers, and as just regular humans also affect acquisition of a language as well. If you're patient enough and you're not doing too many, or there are corrections here and there, and you're helping acquisition on the other part of the spectrum as well. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, Dr. Ashtari is referring to her study done 2014. Very interesting. Something like 80% of people who spoke English as a second language had problems. The person they were talking to claimed not to understand. We asked, yes, what was that, etc. And
yeah, so
good evidence that they did understand, that they were reacting to how the person looked, not what they were saying, which is very discouraging.
There have been studies where they have a recording of a native speaker, and then they have two pictures of a person who looks like a native speaker of that language, and then a person who looks like a non-native speaker of that language. And across the board, the listeners said that the person, just by the picture, so it's the same recording, and they said that the person who looks like a non-native speaker performed much worse than the person who looked like a native speaker. So it is, and sometimes we're not aware of it. In general, we don't know that we're doing this, and we do that, and it's for English and also other languages. So something to think about as ourselves as we're living in this world, that we're also contributing in the acquisition of another person as well.
Oh boy.
Okay, maybe Professor Krashen, this is last question maybe. So someone is asking about your experience, and maybe he is asking you about some of the books that have impacted greatly on you.
Okay, my own experiences are not unusual. I grew up with Yiddish spoken all around by my grandparents. I understood not one word, never picked up any of it, zero. And my parents looked upon it, as everyone did, as a primitive language. It's not, it's the real thing. Then I took French in high school. As I told you, I did terribly. But now my French is okay. From, basically from reading.
From reading.
Yeah.
So self-teaching.
Well, after I became an intermediate. I had a semester at the University of Ottawa as a visiting professor. I worked with the French department, and I did some classes before that that were quite communicative and quite good. So today my French is okay. German was from a year I spent in Austria. I took 1 year of German in college, and then I decided to become a musician. And my parents, who were unbelievably generous, I can't believe how nice they were. I was outrageous, and they just went along with me. It was great. Anyway, hey, you know who this is? We're actually doing a presentation right now.
We are live.
Yeah.
You're talking to 7,000 people, Hayun.
Oh, hi, Kayun. Sorry.
No, this is fabulous. This is my Putong Wada Lausha. This is my Chinese teacher, Hayun.
Ah, Lausha, yeah.
Yeah,
Hayu Lausha.
We did a paper recently about her son and how he acquired Chinese, and he's a wonderful little boy. So
So she can join us.
talk about you. So hang in there, because the question was my own language acquisition experiences. So you got to listen to this. You have to be polite. You can't leave. Okay. Great. Anyway, I went to Austria to do piano, and I had a problem with my teacher, stopped taking lessons, but I acquired German quite well. It was really fun. I had an ideal experience, good classes, good friends, and I read lots of good books in German. And that changed my career. After that, I wanted to do more ESL stuff and get into it because, my German wasn't really going anywhere. And the only career you could have is heavy German literature, which I didn't want to do. After that, I joined the Peace Corps, picked up Amharic, Ethiopian language, from 2 years there. My problem there, kind of similar to what Dr. Ashtari talked about, whenever I tried to speak Amharic, people would answer in English in the capital city in Addis Ababa. I had a couple of friends and did okay. Since then, very rare to speak Amharic. I have to go to an Ethiopian restaurant and entertain the waiters who think I'm hilarious. After that, I keep forgetting. What was it after that? It was Chinese. Yes. And I took a couple Farsi. After I took a couple of demonstration classes, and then Hayun Lu, Chinese teacher from Milwaukee, who is graciously visiting us today. Let me tell you what she did, which is just outrageously generous. She is teaching a class in this high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She recorded her lessons, which the high school allowed teachers to do in case kids are absent, and she sent me the recordings. Isn't that wonderful? So I had, like equivalent of a good semester and a half of Putonghua, of Chinese in that way. So those are the languages I worked on, and I have now acquired, I think, a total of maybe 15 words in Farsi. So I'm off and running. Okay.
Exactly.
So every language. Oh, here's the other thing that was interesting. When I came back from Europe, my mother and my grandfather picked me up at the airport, and Grandpa was speaking Yiddish to Mom, and Mom was answering in English, as they usually do. I understood my grandfather because German and Yiddish are so similar. And since then, I've been taking Yiddish much more seriously, actually doing a little reading in Yiddish, and I speak it whenever I can, but it's really based on the German. It really, really, really helped. So all the time, languages, show me comprehensible input, I will show up, okay?
Yeah. So thank you very much. So finally, we come to the end of this webinar. We are running more than 2 hours. Thank you very much for being patient with us. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to be here with us. Thank you, Dr. Ashtari, for joining us in the last minute and for participating in this discussion. Thank you also thanks to the audience for their interaction and for joining us during these 2 hours. Hopefully this webinar will be beneficial for everyone. So any other comments before we conclude this webinar?
I just want to say, Hen Gao Xing Ren Xi Ni Men, and I hope this won't be the last time. It's been very nice to meet you. I hope we get together.
Sure. So maybe next webinar will be about how to publish good papers.
Good. We'll do that. Save people a lot of time and energy. And
all especially for students and researchers who would like to publish in international journals, but they don't know how to write good papers. So it will be interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Yes, okay. Dr. Ashtari, last word.
It's been amazing. I think we can all get together and do better. So I look forward to everything that's going to happen from now on.
Very
I
good.
hope to see you here one day in Morocco. By the way, have you ever
Oh
been
my
to Morocco,
God.
Dr. Ashtari?
No, I would love to. It's on my
Oh,
list. So for sure.
so I hope to
Okay.
see you here in Morocco.
Oh, did I
Good.
miss
So
you?
thank you.
Yeah, definitely on my list.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Shukran and Vadan. Thank you.